evening, everybody. Full house, look at this. Pretty cool. All right, welcome to... It's only Thursday. All right, welcome to the Brisbane user group. I hope you know where you are. We have 2 talks tonight, and Mark's, I think, covering our what's new, and the usual pizza is 45 minutes away. There we go. If they turn up on time, and they never turn up on time. So we'll get started. So I begin tonight by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. If you don't know who I am, I'm Rian Brooks-Kane. I'm one of the user group leaders here. Alan and Lucy, they're on holidays. I haven't seen them in months, so we're still going. And Clara's in Italy, so lucky her. Yeah. So we have, as I said, a couple of talks today. But the What's New with Mark, Jack is going to talk to us about insurance tech, and I'm going to let everyone read Greg's because that's the title. Yeah, that's it. You said it 10 times and you're done. That's it. Before we get started, though, so the Australian Community Day, which is in August 15th, will probably be the biggest AWS event in Brisbane this year, has their CFP open. CFP? CFS. CFS. Call for sessions, call for speakers, call for presentations. Come and talk. Yeah. So we've got a couple of weeks left on the submission. If you go to that QR code, it will guide you through doing that. Rowan, you're not on the speaker team, are you? You are? No.
If you want to sponsor the community day?
Yeah, talk to him.
We're actually sitting pretty. We've got funding. The community day is happening, so you should apply and do a talk. The intention of a community day is to get the community, you guys, not that guy at the front.
Not me. I'm not allowed to talk.
He's not allowed to talk. To get up there, if you haven't given a talk, this is a great place to talk. As is the user group, but community day is also great.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 different types of talks. So there's the usual like half an hour session-y kind of thing, and there's 10-minute like lightning talks as well. It is open to beginners and professionals alike. So if you got something you think you would be interested in talking about,
so
feel free to apply.
Someone else to talk about something in particular.
Yeah, that's it. Voluntold, I think is the way it can go. So yeah, if you're interested, feel free. Or if you're interested in thinking about it and that thing, feel free to come chat to Rowan and myself, and we're happy to have a chat with you. And that's it. We'll get going. Jack, where'd Jack go? Yep. Oh, no, sorry. Mark, what's new? Where we go? Let's not reorder this again.
Certainly was, wasn't it? It's all right. We can play with that. All right. So if you didn't know the name of the segment, the name of the segment is What's New. My name is Mark Promnitz. I'm a Senior Solution Architect at AWS. I've done this numerous times, and I know a bunch of you. But if you ever want to stop, have a chat, catch up after this, dive deeper into anything, let me know. More than happy to chat. I will rush through most of these, so not to waste your time and get through everything. There's a lot of things that happened since the last user group, a lot of AWS announcements. I've picked the ones I thought were interesting, the ones which would apply to most of you, things that would be interesting. So yeah, very biased view, I guess, of what's been announced since then. We don't have time for 120 odd different announcements. So onto AI. Yes, it's an AWS talk. We can't get away from this thing. So first things first, Q Developer is now available in GitHub in preview. This is awesome. We also have it in GitLab Duo and diving into that. But if you haven't got agents inside your code build CI/CD suite now, I strongly recommend you have a look at it. This thing is pretty awesome. In terms of some of the benefits, things you can do, use cases, have a look. But it will do pull requests. It will work on code. It will do code quality analysis. It will do a whole bunch of things and give that back to you as a pull request or things like that. A few examples. They're tiny, but essentially, hey, I've got a description of the job I want you to do. The agent, after you signed up for, went and did the work. Hey, I've introduced the proposed code changes. Here's the pull request. You can have a look at that. You can approve it through and you can do it. The one on the other side is essentially more on the code scanning and analysis piece. Hey, you've pushed some changes. It's automatically gone and looked at the code, done some of the code analysis and come back saying, hey, things are good, right? Equally, it should come back and say things are not good, but I don't have a picture for that because I stole this from the blog. In terms of what else have we been doing, Q Developer inside Visual Studio Code has the new agentic experience embedded into that. So if you've been watching this space or working in this space for a while, the Amazon Q Developer CLI has been the place to be. So using that CLI is going directly against Claude 3.7. It's doing a lot of agentic things using tools. So you're running this in the Linux terminal. Pretty much, if you're on Windows, sorry, PowerShell, WSL, yeah, okay. If you're in Mac, life's good. We've been telling them that for years. But in terms of using the CLI, it would run scripts, it would do commands, it would do ls, it would do grep, it would do commands. I've got it running against AWS, using AWS CLI, doing commands, looking at things in the CloudWatch logs, helping me debug, doing a lot of awesome stuff. And that's all powered through this agentic CLI. This announcement is bringing that into the IDE. So the IDE in past has just been very much against it, and you've been managing your context doing that. We now have it'll stop, it'll think, it'll do the response and bring that back to you, right? So we brought what we had in the IDE, in the CLI when you're writing in the command line, and brought that experience into the Visual Studio Code. If you're not using Visual Studio Code, these changes will flow through into the other things around JetBrains and the other IDEs. It just takes time before they get to that. Cool, but yeah, the agentics is very much the space to be, and by far will give you the best results. We have released the prompt optimization piece. It's now generally available. We've talked about this in the past, but if you have prompts and you are using prompts and you want to optimize them, so potentially tweak them, tune them around the prompts to get inputs and actually validate that, definitely worth having a look at and running your prompts through this to optimize and tune those for specific models. Our SageMaker Studio unified experience has gone GA. Everything these days in the AI ML data space is coming under that SageMaker branding. So if you remember, SageMaker is just the ML service where we build and deploy and do inference for actual machine learning models. That scope's a lot larger now. So if you start seeing AWS talks around SageMaker, just be aware that it's not just that anymore. It's becoming a holistic experience around how do we manage, manipulate data and get it into shape so that we can use the models on top of that data and get things out of it. Up next, we have Amazon Q. Amazon Q is one of our markets around bringing generative AI to users. It's now available in Word and Outlook. That's only cool because every single one of your users uses Word and Outlook. And having that capability embedded in there around how do we get write emails more efficiently, how do we summarize data, how do we do a lot of things. The tools are now available in the space where people typically want to use them without copying and pasting. So that's nice. Onto the network content and delivery piece. The main key one I wanted to talk about here was nothing too deep, but we have Direct Connect in Brisbane now. That's awesome. I still have not been able to run my Cat6 cable to connect to it, but I am exploring options. So you can get 110 megabits a second. You can get NatSec for those MACsec encryption for those security conscious people. I think this is probably the 8th location in Australia we have a Direct Connect location. So we've got Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, and the like in multiple different locations. But this is the first one in Brisbane. So if you're in Brisbane and you want to run a Direct Connect and have that terminate in Brisbane, it's the fastest way to get to the AWS Edge and then use our backplane to push to regions and things like that. So one of those nice to haves. if you've got that use case.
Available in Megaport as well.
It is available in Megaport. Megaport is there, right? So they can facilitate that connection for you as well. My favorite announcement for this whole thing is the SaaS manager for Amazon CloudFront. This one simplifies a bit of a challenge customers have been having, right, around how do we manage and run essentially different tenants or different users through the same CloudFront distribution, which might be on different domains and might have different TLS certificates and the like. So this one really runs through and helps us set up the multi-tenant experience, manage TLS automation around the certificate management, and just improve that overall experience. I stole a slide. Here's that slide. And it kind of gives you a bit more of a view as to how that maps, right? So you still have your CloudFront distribution. You're still setting up your origin, your cache rules, your WAF on there. You're still setting up your logging settings and your error pages. But for each of your tenants that you can define essentially what's the domain name, what's the TLS settings that I want to have there. You can do overrides for specific, tenant-specific web ACLs. So, mark.example.com might route to one, and Ryan.example.com might route to something else. Right, and I can start picking on people's names in the audience, but I think you get it at this point. But yes, you can get the domain-specific reports and different analytics from it, right? So it helps solve for some of those things that solutions like Cloudflare have been doing for a while. So that's a really nice one. Sorry, question? Or just stretching? All right, cool. I'm good with stretching. I haven't done stretching in a while. I am a bit tired. I was volunteering earlier today. So at Hoz Harvest and helping to cook food and stuff like that. So I'm a bit tired. Stretching is a good idea. I'll do that in a sec. Onto the marketplace. We can now have SaaS sellers that are not necessarily on AWS available in the marketplace. So if you have a SaaS offering and things like that you want to go to market and sell through AWS Marketplace to essentially AWS customers worldwide, good place to list and sell those products, right? So it essentially becomes another procurement challenge. AWS will take on that essentially accounts receivable process for you, so that we will collect the money and make sure that delivers to you, and it's a low barrier entry way to potentially reaching a wider market. All right, on to next, storage. The interesting piece in this one for me was this. It was the provisioned initialization rate. It's not something I expect many of you to have a use case for immediately. But effectively, when you restore an EBS snapshot or EBS volume from a snapshot, there's a period of time before it's fully initialized and available to you. You'll see it in the console now, but you can essentially set a rate at which we will restore that volume for you. Anywhere from 100 megabits a second to 300 megabits a second, like that kind of thing. If you turn the knob and ramp it up, there is costs associated with that, so beware and have a look at what that means. But it does mean that you can get your volumes spun up, initialized faster, which helps with faster recovery times for those critical workloads. It helps you reduce the warm-up time and get things back up and running and essentially re-inflated from those snapshots. By and large, most people will just go click next and just keep going with your standard settings, and it works fine. And typically you don't notice it anyway. But if you're really waiting on some of those volumes which take a bit longer, you can dial up the please restore this faster button and get that done. All right, on to essentially local updates for Sydney, Melbourne kind of things outside of the Brisbane one we were talking about. We have the C7GN instances available in Sydney. These are Graviton. These have high network bandwidth, and they deliver a bunch better throughput over the C6GN instances as well. So essentially generational leaps. These are some really big instances that you can get here. And they're really good for a lot of network processing, high performance computing, genetics, and the like. We have M7A and HPC7G instances available in Sydney as well. The M7A ones are nice. They're our AMD-based chipset general purpose workloads. So they're now available. I would love to talk to anyone else in the room that has a use case for the HPC instance types. Those things are a beast. And they're really designed for that high performance computing workload and get a lot of processing done on some of those instances. All right, we also have this one that came out. It was essentially announcing cross-region automated backups across different regions, 5 different regions. For us, we really only care that now if you take a backup inside Amazon RDS in Sydney, you can tick the box that says, please automatically copy this across into Melbourne. That was not there a few weeks ago. I raised the product feature request to get that through. So, hey, personal plug for me. Yes, I got a change through. And now we have the benefits so that we can automatically ship things across, right? Really good for DR, really good for easy on the things over there now in a different region, and I can restore it. All right, and just one last one. I didn't know what other category to put it under, but an inspector, which is our inspection service, can now scan your Lambda functions without an agent or without any code. So it's really easy for you to turn on. You can essentially tick that box around continuous security posture checks across your infrastructure as it's running. Yeah, security, what's that? I'm just running serverless. I don't even have servers. Why would I need security? Yes, I understand that thought process, and I'm more than happy to debate it later. Please, yes, do have a look at it. Think about how you're doing security and running those kind of things. And with that, that's me. Cheers.
Okay, thanks for having me. A few familiar faces of people I've met. I'm Jack. I'm going to talk a bit about Insurebot. Insurebot started as my hobby, so I see a lot of people here talking about the hobbies, and then it became my job. So I'm going to talk about what we do and how we've built it on AWS. First, a bit about me. I won't read everything on this slide, but I'm Jack. Worked as a teacher for a bit, worked at Accenture for ages, and then went into Insurebot. I love Vegas. I barracked for the Melbourne Demons. They won a grand final in 2021. That's a photo of me there when that happened. And I guess we're in the AWS talk. So my favorite AWS services are API Gateway, DynamoDB, and Lambda. And I've also put AWS Cognito in there, which is probably a dark horse that people wouldn't expect. Only other thing on here, if you do data and you haven't read The Black Swan by Nazim Taleb, you should read it. It's a really good book. Cool. I'll jump straight into it. So I might just give you a demo to show you what Insurebot does first. Insurebot is a product that is used by insurance brokers in Australia. Just put your hand up if you know what an insurance broker does. Some people, yeah, cool. You probably don't deal with one unless you run a business, really. Most people just get the insurance from the insurer's websites directly. Insurance brokers, though, will sell business insurance mostly, and they'll, on your behalf, go to a whole bunch of other insurers, kind of like compare the market, I guess. So our product is for insurance brokers, and it helps them with the quoting process. So I'll hit play on this demo, I think. There we go. And I'll just show you what it does. I've sped it up heaps because there's heaps of questions in these forms, and that way you don't have to watch me type into them all. So this is white labeled. Luxford Home Insurance is one of our customers. This is a link that they can send to their customers. They can get the customers to just fill out all the information that needs to be provided to get insurance quotes. They go through it all, hit submit. In the background, we've got an automation platform that's going off to a whole bunch of insurers. It's going to get quotes from them. So about 8 insurers, depending on which product they use. No, sorry, I missed a step. They get sent an email, someone submitted a quote, they come in here. This is actually where they submit most of the quotes through the Insurebot broker portal. So this is how they typically submit a quote. Then they'll hit submit, and then it'll run off using our automation engine in a moment. So that's submitted a quote. It's running off. It's doing the automation in the background. Once it's finished collecting all of the quotes, it'll send the broker an email. It's branded, so the idea is that the broker could just hit forward on that email, delete the header, and send it to their customer, ready for their customers to sell to their insurers. Sell insurance to their customers. And then, that's another example of they've got kind of the quotes that were given to you by each of the insurers. So that's what it does. We've got a room full of AWS enthusiasts who can guess some of the AWS services I'm using here. Just S3, nailed it, yeah. It's there. Any others? There was a hint on my first slide. Bit of Cognito. Lambda, yeah. I'll jump to the next slide. I'll give you the answer. So this is kind of what our architecture looks like overall. It's kind of broken into two parts. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the portals that brokers and brokers' customers interact with. They're SPAs, so single page applications hosted in S3 through CloudFront. And then all of the data is hosted in DynamoDB. And users the users' clients interact with that data going through an API gateway. It's like if you've done an AWS solution architecture certification, you've seen that. On the other side here, we've got two automation engines. We've got an automation engine for our system to interact with the insurers that only have legacy systems. And what I mean by that is they're systems that were built maybe 15, 20 years ago. They weren't API first. They're very much just portals that you log into with a credential, interact with the system as a user, submit, get a quote. And so that's up the top here. And to interact with those systems, we use robotic process automation. So if you've used Selenium, we use Selenium to interact with the browser. And then we've got our own kind of proprietary orchestration layer that sits on top of that to actually coordinate what needs to happen with those browsers. And then down the bottom, for one of our products, which is cyber insurance, which is a much newer product, what you'll find is these insurers have like multiple systems. As they bring on new products, they will often like bring on a new system with the new product. And so the newer products that have been released more recently are actually more up to date and tend to have APIs that they can make available to us. And that's what you can kind of see down the bottom here. For cyber, we've only got 3 insurers on there right now, but we've got a lot more coming on. And they've all got APIs. And so we don't need to run EC2 instances that are running robotic process automation. We can interact directly with those APIs from Lambda, and we do the orchestration with step functions instead. And it's really neat, actually. So a typical flow. I mean, you just saw the flow there from the customer. I might just start from the broker, though. So a broker would download the single page web app from our CloudFront distribution. They'll submit the quote through the API gateway to MyQuotes endpoint, triggers the Lambda function, writes the data into DynamoDB as a record. It's like literally one record per quote. There's a whole bunch of data in every single quote. We have triggers set up on DynamoDB using DynamoDB Stream. So you can think of DynamoDB Stream as a change handler. So every single time there's a change to a record, it's triggering a Lambda function. That's triggering a Lambda function down there that says that quote's been updated. We write the details of the updated quote to a SNS topic that then puts that into a SQS queue. You'll see that SNS topic reoccur like throughout these flows because there's a whole bunch of functions, a lot that I haven't put in this presentation that hang off it. It's a very event-driven architecture, and they're the events that work kind of hangs off. So then what happens is we've got a whole bunch of EC2 instances in an auto-scaling group. They're just polling for quotes. When there is a quote in the SQS queue that you saw on the last slide, it's going to pick it up and start doing the work. It's going to launch, it's like you don't see it, but it's essentially launching a whole bunch of browsers all in parallel, one to go to Allianz, one to go to CGU, one to go to QBE. It's going to all of them in parallel. It's interacting with all of their systems. It's collecting the quote information, and then it saves it back into the DynamoDB database. And you see that pattern again. There's a record that's been updated in the DynamoDB database, triggers the DynamoDB stream, Lambda goes back to that SNS topic. Sorry, I put this in. That's a bad snapshot of what our step function looks like. So when we're not using EC2 and we're using step functions, that's what the step function flow looks like once you've built it. And it pretty much a whole bunch of these boxes are Lambda functions that get invoked as it goes through and coordinates it. And then for the typical flow, which we were just talking about, you get to this the final stage where the quote's ready. So we've got a filter on quote ready, goes into the SQS queue to pick up the quote, and we use a third-party service to send an email called Brevo. I think MailChimp does mail merge. We call an API. And so that invokes that, and that's how that broker gets the email at the end of the flow. So very event-driven. Only thing that kind of doesn't fall into that serverless category there is just the EC2 instance for the RPA. We don't even have that for the API-only stuff. That's only really there where we're still interacting with web browsers. Okay, so looks easy. Hey, it works, doesn't it? Has anyone touched RPA or even just used Selenium before? Yeah, so Selenium is pretty sweet because at least you control the environment. What we're doing is we're interacting with other people's systems that we don't control. and they go down. Oh, let's talk about some of the things that happen. They have performance issues, so they run really slowly. So if you've used Selenium, you know that you build in like wait up to 10 seconds for this to load. Sometimes that just isn't enough. Their systems just go down, like probably one a day we're seeing go down. Their systems have bugs. And I think we're often the first to discover them because we do such a high volume of runs, or we're the first ones to care about them because they do such high volume of runs over their system. They update their systems. Like, come on, guys. Every time they update the system, add a new question to the form, we have to update our system. There's a whole bunch of stuff that the users interacting with the broker portal can do wrong. That's the list that I came up with pretty quickly, like invalid rego, invalid address. We have solutions to this. I'm just setting the problem. I know you're like, put validation in your form. We do. I'll show you on the next slide. There'll be other configuration changes, like brokerages will change their name, and so you'll get to like an account drop down, and suddenly the broker's name is changed as well. And then often we'll just encounter, like we'll have our flows that do the RPA, and we'll just encounter questions we've never seen before because they're only asked for one specific occupation or something like that. So we learned pretty early on that this wasn't going to be a project that we were going to build and just let it run on a server while we went and did our day jobs. To run this sort of RPA system, I don't know what's happening there. I think it's still plugged in. There it goes. To run this sort of RPA system, we were going to need to have people monitoring it and reacting to these sorts of things that happen throughout the day. And I mean, if you're working in a big organisation and people are talking about RPA, maybe that's if you take anything from this talk, like who's going to support it? Like it needs someone who's actually dedicated to it and understands how it works. Oh, yeah, we don't need a chaos monkey because they do it for us.
What do the vendors think about what you do with their system?
So they're pretty cool with it, to be fair. So all of the systems we interact with
The next slide.
Is that distracting? Why is no one focused? Yeah, so like all of the systems we interact with are behind credentials. So we're not interacting with any systems that are public to the internet. And we don't do anything that an insurance broker wouldn't do themselves. So for example, we're not running over 20 permutations of a quote to see which permutation gets the exact quote. We're just doing it once. And so this shouldn't be skewing their sales data. We're not taking any data away from them except for like the actual quote prices. We're not taking any like PII out of their systems. So they're pretty good with it. We've had some that have come back. So we don't have the relationship with we provide our service to brokers. Brokers have the relationship with insurers. We've had some insurers come back to the brokers. One of them asked for us to rate limit. So to kind of have a lock, don't do any more than 2 transactions per minute. That was no dramas. Like when that happens, we just do it and it's not a problem. Yeah, so how do we combat some of those things? So we just need a whole bunch of validation in our front end. So rego lookup, address lookup, those types of things. And there's a whole bunch of user intervention. So we've built the ability to kind of toggle insurers. So that insurer's down, toggle them off. You're just not going to get quotes from that insurer right now because they're not working. So if we see an intervention, we can do that. We tell users when it happens, so you can kind of see there's a banner along the top that gives them a heads up. If you submit a quote now, you're not going to get a quote from them. We've built our own messaging platform within the system as well, so we can communicate that with users as well. And when we see a novel exception, we've got a little Java app that pops up and asks us what we want to do. Do we want to error out the quote, retry it, or skip a step? And that's kind of how, as the bot's going through, when it hits something it hasn't seen before, when a system's down, that's how we kind of become aware of it. A lot of that, well, all of that is driven through Slack. So Slack is kind of our single pane of glass for things that are happening. So if we get CloudWatch alerts, for example, like an API error, that will go to Slack and someone will look into it. There's another tab there that I haven't clicked on, but there's also one for user interventions. So if it's kind of going through the flows and it has a system error, it sends a notification. And we support the system 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and like myself or like Isaac and Jaden work with me as well. One of us will jump in there and look at what's gone wrong and toggle an insurer or address it however it's needed. And then we have a whole bunch of CloudWatch dashboards. Like this is just one example of one of the ones that we use, and we jump in there because, like you saw our architecture, it's pretty much all on AWS. We pretty much have everything sitting in CloudWatch log groups, And the CloudWatch dashboards actually give us much of what we need, of course coupled with metric filters and alarms that send all those alerts to Slack that you saw before. So we're not sitting here watching this, we're just watching Slack. We get an alert if something's gone wrong. Yeah, well, we'll get there sometimes. Just because I wanted to cover the breadth of services we did in this overview, we also do our invoicing through AWS. Well, that's not completely true. We use Xero to do invoicing. Most small businesses do. We have monthly recurring invoices set up in Xero. They automatically generate an invoice at the first of every month. We're subscribed to their webhook. They send us an alert saying this invoice has been created. It goes in a queue, and then we essentially have a function that queries, because I didn't say this, we charge per transaction, so we need to know how many transactions a brokerage did last month so that we can charge it. So that function does the query to see how many transactions the person did last month, updates the invoice, and that's an example of what invoices coming out of Xero look like with each transaction. Then they get pretty long. I don't think people read them, but they pay their bills. We also, accompanying every single invoice, we also use QuickSight to generate reports. So we have scheduled reports coming out of QuickSight. They come out pretty good. The main thing we try to do is we have a metric up there that says we estimate this is how much time in administrative effort we've saved each month, and we love to remind our customers every single month, you're using us because we're saving your time. Like that's what it's really about. So right now we're saving about 25 FTE for our customers every single year, and yeah, the bigger customers have a really big number there, still expressed in minutes, so it looks really big. You kind of asked a moment ago to Ryan, how do our customers feel about this? Oh, sorry, how do the insurers feel about it that we interact with? And we also interact with a system that's ran by another software company. They're pretty cool about it, but they do have security requirements. And so as we started to scale, we started to get these emails that required us to complete UpGuard surveys. I don't know if you guys have seen UpGuard. It's actually, I think it's a great tool. But it asks you a whole bunch of questions about whether you're following best practices in security. Most of it's about process, to be honest, but there is a whole bunch of enterprise tools they expect you to have. And AWS lets you buy them like on a consumption basis, so you don't have to put a lot of money out. And yeah, similar. We got a similar thing from some of the insurers that came to us and said what sort of security to have. So again, we're using a bunch of AWS tool in there. I won't go through it, it's too much. Cost breakdown, you might be wondering, how much does it cost us all serverless? We're spending about $8,000 US a year, and most of it is VPC infrastructure. So it's running those servers in the auto-scaling group. Some of the security tooling costs a little bit, like Security Hub costs a little bit, GuardDuty costs a bit. AWS, like you turn on Security Hub, and then you immediately have to turn on AWS config if you don't have that turned on, and that costs more than Security Hub. So prepare yourself for that, especially if you have an auto-scaling group, because it creates offline in there. That's the breakdown. Getting to the end of it, if I was starting again, what would I do differently? I wouldn't have spent time on any of the existing RPA platforms. I didn't think they were any good, really. Most of them were just running Selenium under the shelf anyway, and they're just providing like a low-code GUI that you can drag around. So I originally built it using WorkFusion, but I wouldn't do that again. I would have enabled security tooling from the get-go. So especially like I would have turned on Security Hub. I would have turned on all the things Security Hub told me to turn on, because I did that later, and it just meant that every single time I turned on a setting, I was worried things were going to break. There's a white paper that AWS has published about SaaS tenant isolations. So in my case, it talked a lot about what your key in your DynamoDB database should look like so that it's appropriately partitioned. But I wish I'd read that first because it causes a bit of pain. We still have a problem with that CloudFormation template. We've got 1 mega CloudFormation template. It's getting really long. I wish I'd thought about how we're going to structure that earlier on. Not something I do differently, but DynamoDB is cool. I used relational databases my entire career, but I really like DynamoDB. And if you can change the way you do work to fit within it, I think it's pretty amazing. I do the useful Slack integration. That's all just built through Lambdas right now. I think a lot of that's out of the box with EventBridge these days, so I probably would look to do that instead. And then we have a lot of orchestration logic in our running on the EC2 instances, and I think I could have actually structured the work in a slightly different way so that was in the step function and sending smaller chunks at a time to the EC2 instances. the end of my talk. I feel like I flew through it. Is there any questions? And if you don't have any questions, I've got some ideas of things you might want to ask me.
Using SNS for a lot of that message passing, like shortening. Do you just predate, like EventBridge seems to be the way to do it now, separately from that Slack point that you made, which I think is also true.
Yeah.
So that's the first question I have.
Yeah, I haven't looked enough into EventBridge to see, like, I made the Slack comment because when I was building the most recent Slack integration, I saw that. If it's the way to do it, and I was doing it again, I probably would use EventBridge, yeah.
Probably, I would imagine if you're fanning out those messages, you're probably doing a lot of kind of filtering on the clients that are listening.
Yeah.
That the EventBridge, event detail and stuff just kind of takes care of, and then you can kind of plug into different parts of the pipelines, you have EventBridge pipelines and stuff like that. Cool.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I would use it, yeah.
The other question is then, so using Xero to invoice your customers, is there any reason you're not using like a platform like Stripe or something like that?
Well, so we use Xero. We have like everything in Xero. So we do our payroll in Xero. We do our invoicing in Xero. When we get bills, the bills get created in Xero. It's just our accounting software. And so by doing that in Xero, our credit controls in Xero. So if someone doesn't pay, Xero does the follow-up. It's kind of just, there's no good reason. It's just, yeah. It does integrate Stripe though. So customers do pay with Stripe. Like for the payments side of it, yeah. Okay.
Love the presentation and what you're outlining. I'm intrigued to hear a bit more about the business.
Yeah, sure.
How big's the market for
Yeah.
insurance brokerage? How many people do you have with you pulling this together? What's the possibilities for going to other markets?
Yeah, love that question. So we see the market, we see the available market to us in Australia as about 5,000 insurance brokers, so maximum of 5,000 users. We have about 1,000 of them right now. So we think we've got about 20% of the Australian market. There isn't much, so the way we see it, there's not much more we can do by way of this sort of automation in the Australian market because we've automated the high volume product classes like home, motor, all the really high volume ones we've done. And then you're getting down to like really niche things where automation won't make sense. And so our growth in Australia is going to be limited to those 5,000 users with what we have right now. Working in the business, so I've got my co-founder who was an insurance broker. I don't know how you could really start a B2B business. I mean, you can, but how you start a B2B business when you don't have the business guy who's from the industry, because he's the one who had all the connections. He was running around doing demos, showing people, onboarding the customers, and it made a really big difference in starting the business. Now there's 4 of us, so it's my co-founder Scott and myself. We both draw a wage, so we're not working for free. And then we've got Isaac and Jaden who are sitting here, and they're developers. And then, yeah, for future growth beyond the market we've got, we're trying to extend our reach beyond just the middle piece of doing the automation to all of the other things you can do with that structured data. So the reality is right now, there's like 100 questions on that form. And right now, brokers don't store that data in their own system. That data is mostly stored in other insurer systems. And you'll often see a broker either get the schedule from the insurer or go back into the insurer system to get that information to then fill it into another insurer system. We now have all that structured data, and so we can add value in other places. Like at renewal time, we're working on the flow right now to do they call it the pre-renewal renewal. You essentially have to send the customer, this is the information we have, review it, confirm it's correct, send it back. So we're looking at that space. We've got an AI feature, which I won't talk about today. Jaden built it. I'm going to let him do a talk another time, where it uses our structured data to give AI advice, and that's a big value add as well. And so, yeah, we're kind of reaching out there. And then, like, finally, we're looking to kind of reach out to New Zealand as the next obvious market for us as well. Yeah. Did that answer? Was there a bit I didn't answer?
After New Zealand? Where?
I don't know. I don't know, because, yeah, we haven't thought that far ahead. Yeah. Any others? No? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You have this crazy data pipeline set up. How many people and how many months did that take?
Yeah, so it's, I mean, we've been building it iteratively for 5 years, is the reality. And we've kind of just, because of how we've been building it, they're not microservices, I don't want to use that word, but like they're very componentized. Like we'll just add on a feature and it'll be almost independent of everything that already existed. And so it's pretty resilient in that way. But really so it was me while I had a full-time job for the first 2 years. And then for the last, 2 years after that, Jaden, you were working with me. So in the next 2 years, it was Jaden and myself working on it. And then Isaac's joined us this year. And that's kind of the people who are working on it. And our time split between this and customer support. So we do still spend time onboarding new customers, like looking into issues that they're having with the system, those types of things. So, yeah.
Maybe a follow-up question. Is it manageable with a small team as complex as it is?
Yeah, I think it's easier, actually. Yeah, having worked at Accenture, I've worked in really, really big teams. And with it, like we all sit next to each other in an office, and I think you can really build a lot really quickly with a small team in a way that with a big team you just couldn't. What also makes it different is whilst my co-founder was an insurance broker, and so he was providing a lot of that information that I guess a business analyst would often be providing someone who's working on a bigger technical project, we didn't have to get sign-off of the people we're building for to go live. Like we don't have to and so if we think that a feature is too niche and isn't worth building, we just don't have to build it. We'll just say that's out of scope, we're not going to do that, and just ship it. And I think that's also made it a lot easier as well. Like we really can just ship when we think it's ready and when we think it's going to add value. Yeah.
I'd love to hear about your onboarding process with new customers. How tailored can you be? Are you with them so it feels like it's there and it's an extension of their product?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's twofold. So I'll answer the question you asked first, which is about how tailored is it for them. So there's two areas where we can brand it, and it's the customer-facing areas. So we've got the customer portal that you saw at start with, which had their logo at the top, and they can just change some of the colours, and that's about the extent of the branding there. And then you saw that we were using a third-party service called Brevo to create the emails for them to send. Brevo is full-featured design, MailChimpy kind of thing, and so we can go nuts there. We'll build whatever they want in there for them as a part of the onboarding. That's the easy part, to be honest. So the other part is as the bot is going through and interacting with their systems, each brokerage has a different setup for the systems they use. And even the insurer systems look a little bit different between brokerages because some of the drop-downs have different values in them. So the other thing we have to do before users can get started is we've got an onboarding tool, which essentially opens a browser next to this little tool that we've built. And the tool says, go to the new client screen. We go to the new client screen, and the tool goes and downloads all of the options in all of the drop-downs in the client screen and saves it to our master configuration database for that tenant. So that when they then go in to do that configuration, they're selecting from drop-downs of valid options as opposed to free text writing the wrong thing in. Yeah.
I might be adding myself as an ex-DA, but I'm looking at the secondary use of the data. You're storing a whole bunch of quote data that comes back for each and every quote from all the different providers.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about analytics and building out a data set which compares and contrasts the different providers and using that as a secondary kind of sell it back to the provider saying, hey, this is how you're performing versus
it's for us, it's a really fine line to tread with the relationship with the insurers. I'll actually answer it two ways. So firstly, there is existing systems that the brokers used that do something similar, but the difference is this other system I'm thinking of, the insurers actually bought into it. And they're just not all on it, is the reason the brokers don't use it. Half the insurers are on it, half aren't. They actually do provide that reporting that you're talking about back to the insurers. But the insurers are kind of all on board and they know what the deal is. We actually were approached to sell our data. There's a group that do consulting to insurance companies around pricing. That's their job, and they'll go into an insurance company when an insurance company is about to launch a new product, and they'll say, you don't want to be too expensive or too cheap. If you're too cheap, you end up getting all the flood risk that costs you a lot of money, and if you're too expensive, you don't sell any policies. And so they'll go in there and try and sell it. And they've got a plethora of data for all of the consumer-facing insurers because there's nothing other than a capture stopping you from getting a quote. And they don't have that data for brokerages. And so we did actually even have, they approached us and we had a discussion about what that might look like. I think it's an opportunity. We decided that it could cause us issues that conflict with our core business. And we thought it's just if this, like, I just don't even want to have the conversation with one of our customers about, are you selling out? Like, it's just something that we decided to steer away from for that reason. Like, even anonymized, it's just didn't seem worth it. Yeah, but yeah, couldn't agree more.
Okay, the other question I've got is, please keep going for the next 10 minutes while I go to get pieces.
Cool. Yeah.
You mentioned some of the more niche policies that you won't touch.
Yeah.
What kind of policies won't you touch?
An example might be farm. That's one. If my co-founder's here, he'd list off a few more. Farm's one. What you'll find, those policies themselves, even the insurers aren't using like proper systems yet. Like, you'll submit the quote to the insurer, and there'll be an underwriter who's themselves, they're like looking up the house on the Brisbane City Council flood, or the farm on the Brisbane City Council flood maps. That's a terrible example because there's no farms in Brisbane. But they'll be using all these tools and data sets and doing it manually, because even the insurers themselves haven't taken the time to automate that process. And so the closest thing to automation we could even probably do for a lot of them would actually be to spit out Word documents that automatically get emailed to the insurers. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know the others, sorry. Yeah. Cool. Should I answer some of my curveballs that I gave myself? Okay. Oh, you got one over there, sorry.
I was going to ask the Cognito, like, I'm a big Cognito fan, but it's probably the most hated AWS.
I know, it's got such a bad rap.
So please tell me why you love Cognito.
Why do I love Cognito? It's so integrated into AWS. And so for the purpose of authorization in our DynamoDB database, we can actually assert, like, whether a user authenticated to Cognito has access to a record and refuse them access to a record. So I haven't explained that very well, but when a user authenticates against Cognito, you have against your Cognito user pool, you have an option to then map a IAM role, so the same roles that you use when you interact with AWS, to that Cognito user. And that user can then actually get credentials for the IAM role and interact with AWS services as though they had IAM. So I like that. They also have recently launched a whole bunch of new features. So recently they've given us a passkey login, passwordless sign-in, which I thought was really neat. So we kind of got that for free, so to speak. That's not true. They changed the price, and so we're paying more for it, but we didn't have to do a lot of build to get it. And the other thing they've got, which I think is really neat, is advanced threat protection. And it will actually, so you know how you get your Google, maybe you don't, but you can go to Google and see your dark web report, and it tells you like all the compromised credentials you have. And it's really, you get really nervous because like it actually is your password that you use everywhere that they've got. The AWS has their own database of compromised credentials, and they're actually checking when someone logs in, if that credential is in a compromised credential database, they don't let the user log in. And so they just can't log in. And so I think that's a really neat feature that we recently turned on as well. We turned that on in audit mode before we turned it on completely, and we found 6% of the users logging in had compromised credentials. But that can include just basic credentials, like AWS checks against the compromised credentials, but also checks against like password 01 also counts as not good enough. Yeah. Sorry, there's another.
How do you find your intuitiveness versus your detailed customer support requirements, and then what you do as far as looking at additional features?
Yeah.
How you deal with that?
Yeah. So when you say intuitive, do you mean like customers knowing how to use the system? Yeah.
Be able to just open it up and
Yeah.
go, click, and I'm going already.
Yeah. Well, we are terrible at training. So all the customers that are using it, by terrible, I mean we don't really run it. So all the customers that are using it just jumping into the system. We've seen that it could be, we don't really have a good way to measure it. Like I know that we don't have enough people interacting with it to do proper A/B tests and that sort of thing. Like we just don't have the volumes necessary. So we're very much left with us reaching out to the customers and checking how things are going. But I think we have an okay track record on the intuitiveness. We've just done a complete redesign that if you look at our LinkedIn, you'll see a few of the things that Isaac's been working on around how to kind of bring it up to speed with some of the newer systems. And then for new features, it's so common because a lot of these brokers are kind of tossing up between building their own thing versus like using us. And what we can do a lot of the time is actually build a feature that a broker wants. So often when we're doing the demo, they'll say, that looks great, but we really wanted this feature. And we will build that feature. And our only rule around building any features that we add into the system, because we've got two devs plus me sitting around doing nothing but support. Like we do have, we need people to monitor the bots because things go wrong. but all of our time is getting reinvested back into building the platform. And so when someone does come to us with a new feature, our only rule is it a feature that we can roll out to everyone? So everything that we build has to be able to be rolled out to all of the brokerages. And we make the features controllable through configuration. So we'll roll it out to all the brokerages, but we'll only turn it on for the one that asked for it, and then we'll let other people know when.
I did the same thing as, well, my first thing is, what will it break?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah.
Then will other people use it? Is it going to be viable? And then make sure that everyone can still turn it off.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah. That should be my first thing too. I'll probably do break things. Yeah, last thing, yeah, about to go live. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned the RPA can have a problem almost once a day.
Yeah.
What's your percentage of maintaining that versus the rest of, I guess, your support and development?
It's probably like 5%, I guess. Yeah, it's not a lot because the issues, the worst we've had it was we had an insurer like re-platform their whole system. So they just went and bought a whole new system for their policy management. And so we just had to rewrite all of our flows. And that took us about 2 weeks. So that's as bad as it gets. That's only happened once in the 5 years I've been doing it. And brokers just didn't get quotes from that insurer for 2 weeks. And that was the fallout. Usually it's like they've added a question that we already have in it. We have so many questions because we have a superset of all the questions that everyone asks. And so an insurer might add a question, but it's not usually new to us. It's usually just new to them. And so usually it's just a matter of like taking the data that we already have and just adding an extra line of code and putting it in there. And then push to prod, reset the bots. They're off and running again. Yeah.
So the portals that the RPA is interacting with, are they the portals that the brokers would usually interact with?
Yeah, the RPA is not doing anything that a broker wouldn't do.
So does that mean it's logging in as that?
Yeah, usually it's logging. So we launched off a broker policy system, which has single sign-on with most of the insurers already. So like they launch into them there. And so we have like service account credentials created for that broker management system, and that's what it's logging in with.
You had a slide where there was a bunch of like security services that you said you leveraged.
Oh yeah. Do you want me to talk about one?
Yeah, can you just expand a bit about the guard duty
Oh yeah.
that you're using? What is that doing?
So the findings that I've noticed most from it is, so it does anomaly detection. Like as I understand the underpinnings of it, it's actually using like machine learning anomaly detection, and it's doing it across kind of the data that you can already see in CloudWatch. I don't think it's. I know you can actually now install agents. We're not using the like EC. There's like an EC2 ECS runtime monitor. We're not using that. We're using like the other ones. I can't remember the names of them. CloudTrail. You know, the ones I've noticed most is things along the lines of unusual API called by this user, and it'll say like this user has called the list organizations API, which is not usual, and it'll be those types of things that it picks up. Yeah.
Gotcha. Would you say like how much of, because you seems like you're using a lot of services for security.
Yeah.
How much of that is your total spending like?
Good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but I've got a slide on it. Oh, it's the other way. There it is, 15%.
Have you ever been attacked by a malicious attacker or organization?
Never. So we like one thing that we never that I know of. one thing that we do is we are geofenced, so you have to be hitting us from Australia, which like if we're a target, you're going to hit us from Australia, right? Like sure, you can get a VPN to Australia, but we're less likely to get picked up by the scans that are just like hitting the whole internet, because those scans can run all around the world. So I think that helps a lot. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know what to say. Like we haven't seen any obvious attacks, and we haven't had any reports of data breaches. But it's not a challenge. Like we don't think we're foolproof. It's not going to be a feat. Just no ideas.
I'll ask you last question because I feel like I'm probably the only networking person in the room.
Oh yeah, you are. I'm not.
I saw the PFC.
Oh, PFC. Oh, good. Yeah. No, actually, I've got a prepared answer for that question. So, good question. Where's my architecture diagram? So I can show everyone else what you're talking about. So, we've got a PFSense Plus appliance. Okay, so I got that through AWS Marketplace. You're probably more familiar with the other brand like Cisco. pfSense Plus did the same thing, but a bit cheaper. Why? Like, I'm using AWS services for everything else. Why am I not using AWS site to site? Why am I not using AWS VPN? And I might stick my foot in this if you know more about networking than me. But we have an IPsec connection with something called the Sunrise Exchange, which the insurers provide. That's how you access some of the insurer systems. You have to go through there. And they required me to appear as a certain IP address when I went through the exchange. And so I needed network address translation, which I don't think was out of the box. Is that still not out of the box?
Not really.
Yeah, I've seen people say, like, you put a NAT gateway in front of it, and then, yeah.
A lot of the stuff I've done is the same with energy companies. It's the same with finance. They all have these weird and wonderful like NAT and requirements that you just can't use.
You can't do it. Well, they gave me IP. So it's kind of like AWS will give you the configuration file that you're meant to upload to your system. But I don't control this. And these guys themselves have hundreds of brokerages that they give their standard configuration file to. And so even if AWS did support NAT, I didn't like my chances of giving them a AWS configuration file and saying, can you set this up? Yeah.
Annoyingly common in old school environments like that.
Yeah. Maybe one day. Maybe soon. I'll do it. Cool. I'll be around, guys. So if you have any other questions, feel free to ask. Thanks.
Welcome, everybody. Before I introduce myself, the context of why you're seeing AWS Summit here is that I'm actually presenting this talk at AWS Summit in a developer lounge. So this is my actual slide pack that I'll be using at Sydney Summit, using this forum as a bit of a test, right? A little bit of a run through before I go live on stage. Sorry? Yeah, dev mode, definitely. So open feedback and hopefully sticking in the time limit and things like that I have. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. So the talk that I'm working through, a bit of a mouthful here. Essentially, we're talking about automating compliance using AWS Systems Manager automation and AWS config. So who am I? Well, my name's Greg. And that's about it. Hi, everybody. No, so I started my career a little bit different to others. Started in defence in the Australian Army in Signals. I've got over 20 years experience in IT. I primarily focus around networking, security and infrastructure. So there's different specialties that we can have in AWS, as we know. There's lots and lots of different things that we can specialise in. So that's my specialty. I'm an AWS ambassador, an AWS community builder. I'm a well-architected lead within my partner. And I'm a member of the Subaru WRX Club. So if anyone's a motorhead here, I'd love to speak to you. Father of two, and I have 8 pets. So I'm very, very busy. Whether it's the kids or the pets, I don't know which wins. I work for a partner called Cevo. We're an AWS Premier Tier partner. We do professional services. We're founded in 2016. We have 4 competencies, 4 partner programs and 3 service validations, all from a pretty small team, mind you. So we're punching well above our weight. We focus on modernisation, advisory, data and AI as our 3 main categories. And the agenda for today, what we're talking about is a little bit of a problem overview. So what is it that we're trying to solve? And because we're using a whole bunch of services that are intertwined with one another, what I wanted to do is, rather than just diving into what it is that I'm presenting, let's have a little bit of an overview of what those services are and the context in which they're used, so that when we talk about the solution, it kind of makes sense. So the idea being a level 300 is that we actually take you on a bit of a journey. So I'm going to do a little bit of an overview around AWS Organizations, AWS Config, AWS Systems Manager, And finally, the overview of a practical solution, which can be used as a pattern to follow for other things that we may want to do in the future. So this is just an example. Now the problem statement. So if we think about governance and compliance, so governance establishes the foundation, what it is that you want to achieve. So that is just an idea to some degree. It establishes the foundations for what you want to do for ethical and responsible business. Compliance, however, is the enactment of that. And that is how you actually implement it in your organisation. They're mutually needed to one another. And the question is, how do I ensure that I remain compliant to my governance? It's a very interesting question. So in order to establish the compliance factor to my governance, well, I need detective controls, preventative controls. I also need proactive controls, so the things that are doing things on my behalf. Finally, we want to report on that. We also want to measure the success of that. And then finally, we want to automate it, because no one wants to spend time working on compliance when they can be building cool stuff instead. So a quick overview of AWS Organizations. So I've broken it down into preventative controls and accounts management are the two main features of organizations. For those that don't know, Organizations is a service which I'll go through in a little bit more detail. Preventative controls are things like service control policies. So those are preventative things or wrapping around services and the maximum available things that you can do with those services. We also have a context called resource control policies, which are more finely tuned towards resources. So the same sort of boundaries of what you want to do, but it's tuned to those resources in particular. There's backup policies. We also have AI opt-out policies. So these are things that you don't want AI to touch certain parts of your data. So you can control what data is actually shared with AI. There's declarative EC2 policies. So all the things that you can do with EC2 and other services. Tagging policies. So what your organizational tag structure might look like. And there's also chat applications policies. So what services are allowed to chat with other services in AWS. And finally, when we get into central accounts management, the whole idea around this is central around a targeted product called organizational units. I'll talk more about that in the next slide. But essentially there's accounts management. So how do I manage all of my different AWS accounts across my organization? Organization sits within the confines of what we call a management account. And that management account is in control of all of your other sub-accounts, if you will. It does central billing. So if we think about bringing the AWS bill centrally and taking advantage of scale, right? So the use of services have got different quotas within their services, not just in terms of limits, but also cost. One of the advantages that you have with the use of organizations is that by centrally billing all of those things from all of your accounts, you can take advantage of the scale of those services to get better pricing. So it can be cheaper to run consolidated billing. It also does central services access. So it controls the services that you actually deploy and how you manage those across your organizations, across all of your accounts. And finally, we have a concept of delegated administrator. So this enables you from the management account to say, instead of being all hands-on in the management account, I want to keep that separate. And I want to maintain that because that's the central control of my organization. So the concept of a delegated admin means that you actually assign a different AWS account as the admin for that particular service, meaning that you no longer need to be hands-on with your management account. So it democratizes access to those services and how you manage them. And the concept of organisational units, and this will all become clear, mind you, as we get further through this particular presentation, but they're essentially a container for accounts. We can have different concepts within that container. So we can have nested containers. We can have multiple levels of that container. So this has nothing to do with the actual account itself. The account just lives in a container, in an organisational unit. We apply things like service control policies. When we apply that, it's inherited throughout that hierarchical structure, wherever we apply it, at whichever level. When we start thinking about the root account or the management account of an organisation, it is unaffected by service control policies. So if we think of the management account, we don't want that to be affected by those service control policies because we could lock ourselves out, and that's not what anyone wants. And there's a logical hierarchical structure. So we produce that within the confines of organisations. Further to this, we have a service known as Systems Manager. And this is not just one service. This is actually comprised of many other services all combined together to formulate a comprehensive set of controls and capabilities. This includes enhanced visibility for things like inventory management. So we can look at anything managed under Systems Manager. We have full inventory access. So think of it a bit like a CMDB. We can have an organisational view. So we can have a look at what does our infrastructure look like across my entire organisation, which, as we just learned, could be comprised of many, many accounts and many, many different services. And we also have we have the ability to manage the agents. So we can deploy agents to those to those EC2 instances, for example, which enables us to then obtain a very large amount of information and also use features like secure remote access. And that leads us into boost efficiency with automation. So the concept being that we can use secure remote access without exposing those particular pieces of infrastructure. We can also automate common administrative tasks. So the things that we just don't want to do, we know we have to, and we know that we want to keep doing them, but without doing all the manual tasks in between. And finally, we have the concept of automation documents. And this is a key factor in the solution that I'll talk about later. It simplifies node management. And the way that we simplify that is through the use of runbooks. So we can identify a runbook that says, do this task and do this set of tasks and just execute it. It's not dissimilar to the likes of an Ansible runbook. When we look at security patching, so we can actually patch all of those instances and do centralized patch management. We can manage patch windows and maintenance windows and all that sort of stuff. We can also do that within Systems Manager. And finally, there's a hybrid mode, and that allows you to actually manage instances that are sitting in your on-prem environment. So these could be virtual machines running a Systems Manager agent, which then gives you the ability to centralize all of that data from your cloud and your on-prem environment. It doesn't have to be on-prem, it can actually be other clouds as well. As long as they're running the agent and can speak to the Systems Manager endpoint, you have hybrid activation. Very, very powerful. And when we think about config, so AWS config is a service that looks at state of configuration of all of your entire AWS environment. We use it for security analysis. So we have things like config conformance packs that do the particular security standards that we want to apply. So we can deploy config conformance packs, which enables us to then measure our security compliance against that particular compliance framework. You can also deploy your own config conformance packs as well, so that you can target certain things that you want to track your compliance for. Non-compliant reports, so we can then generate reports out of AWS config to say, what are my non-compliant resources? And we can also use auto-remediation, so resources which fall out of compliance can then be brought back into compliance. Really powerful stuff, and that's actually central to the solution that I'll talk about later. There are a lot of integrations with config. So config integrates in with AWS Security Hub. It also integrates in with EventBridge. So you can look at event-driven architecture and event-driven remediation. It also integrates in with Lambda, third-party partner solutions, and also Systems Manager, which is key. For resource administration, we look at AWS config rules. So even a conformance pack is a list of rules. It's a list of things that say, this is what my architecture should be, or this is what my infrastructure should be. And that is a standard, and it uses a whole bunch of rules for doing that. And we measure those rules. We can detect misconfigurations. So a great use of config is to detect when something has changed and you didn't expect that to change. So you can then report on that and say, what happened during that event? So let's correlate those events together, and then we can find out how that happened. You can get notification of changes. So that's more along the lines of proactive alerting for non-compliant resources. So for auditing compliance, you can look at historical state recording. So you can look at what happened during a timeline to an individual resource and what standards that I want to apply to that. And finally, we can use it for troubleshooting. So when things go bang, we can say, well, did it change? And what changed? So we can get a little bit more context to that. And overall, this is part of a bigger system. So this would be part of what we call a secure landing zone. So all of these services can be introduced individually and used in their own rights, but together and across scale and looking across an entire organisational structure, this is an example of how those services can be used across an entire organisation, meaning that we can have consistent, proactive and detective controls. So if we lead into a practical example of this, one of which is to automate things like VPC Flow Logs. That sounds simple, but first of all, what would you need VPC Flow Logs for? So some of those things could be diagnosing restrictive security group rules. What am I actually hitting with my security group rules, and what traffic is actually being denied or permitted? We can understand the flow of that traffic, and it's part of the well-architected security pillar. It also follows AWS foundational security best practices findings. So one of the things that will be flagged as part of that through AWS config and also Security Hub, you'll actually be flagged if you're not having VPC flow logs enabled on your VPCs because you're missing a critical observability pathway. It integrates into third-party tools. So there's a lot of third-party tools out there that actually can comb your VPC flow logs and give you credible information about what's actually moving in and out around your network and around your infrastructure. And we can use it for regulatory compliance requirements. So we can actually determine that traffic is being blocked, for example, that should be blocked. And we can see that in evidence. So if we think about this in a problem statement, so let's say I want to take VPC flow logs, I want to centralize them and store them in a single S3 bucket. I want to ensure that flow logs are enabled on all my VPCs in all my accounts. okay, this all sounds pretty easy so far. I want to ensure that VPC Flow Logs cannot be turned off. So then we're starting to talk about that compliance factor. How do I actually prevent it from someone going in and turning that off? And I want to automatically configure VPC Flow Logs on all new and existing VPCs. So you've got to think about brownfield deployments. Okay, we've got things that are already in place. So I'm not just talking about what I'm doing in the future, which is generally much easier to tackle as a problem, as opposed to something that already exists. So if we look at the key takeaways from that problem, we've got all VPCs, all AWS accounts. We want to centralize the storage. We want to prevent changes. And we also want to automate the process because no one wants to go and do this manually, especially across a very large organization with many VPCs. So some of the challenges that we might face would be, I need to check the status of VPC Flow Logs. How do I check that across all my VPCs, across all of my accounts, across my entire organization? That gets really hard. I want to centralize the bucket and it needs access from all accounts. So we've got to think about the security aspect here. This might require something like a bucket policy, for example. So I have to think about how I'm securing that data. And the third part of this is logic. So we need to have some sort of logical flow. What if flow logs are enabled, but they're not set to go to my S3 bucket? They're only set to go to their own bucket in their own account. Right? I need to update that and say, no, you don't go there anymore. You go to my central bucket because I want to centralize my VPC flow logs so that I can centrally see what's going on. And I might have an integration with a third-party tool, for example, that needs to pick all that up. It's far easier to do that from a single destination than it is to take that from disparate destinations and then have to manage all of those individual flows. If flow logs are disabled, I need to enable it. And then I also need to set that central S3 bucket. Again, all of this sounds very simple, but in reality, trying to do this outside of the use of automation is quite a headache. And finally, we want to prevent any changes made to it. So what preventative controls could I implement to prevent someone from disabling the flow logs? And the answer for all of these things is a combination of things together. And if we wrap all this up, we're starting to talk about an S3 policy. Got VPC flow logs, so a central bucket. We want to host that in the audit account, or the log archive account rather. We want to have config rules. So we want to use AWS config as a rule to match against that particular outcome. Are VPC flow logs enabled? That is how I check. We use Systems Manager automation documents. So there is a Systems Manager automation document specifically targeted for enabling VPC flow logs and where to send them. So quite handy. We need to use a Lambda function to do that task on our behalf, but we don't need to create that Lambda function. This is all done as part of the automation. We need to use organizations because we need to target where we're applying that particular automation. We need to implement an SCP, so a service control policy, which prevents someone from turning off VPC flow logs. So a preventative control. And finally, the way that we automate this and deploy this is through CloudFormation stack sets. We do this as what we call a service managed stack set. So this means that we can target specific organizational units and the structures, and it will apply to those whether it's a new account or an existing account. So more importantly, if I add a new account to an existing organizational unit and I have deployed a service managed CloudFormation stack set to that particular organizational unit target, then as I add additional accounts to it, they will automatically receive that CloudFormation stack set. So I no longer have to consider how do I do this, not from this point, but but from this point on. Very, very important. And overall, the actual solution looks like this. So we take the organization structure. We have a CloudFormation stack set. We deploy that to a set of organizational unit targets. We have a service control policy, which we apply at the root or at the individual hierarchical structures, which then are inherently added to those accounts to force compliance. We actually enable this through the management account, and this enables us to then manage that going forward through the delegated administrator, which is our audit account. And this is part of a secure landing zone. That actually deploys the CloudFormation stack set to each of the individual member accounts. It sets up a config rule, the Lambda function to automate it. It uses Systems Manager automation documents, as we determined earlier, to check if VPC Flow Logs are enabled and to set the destination to the central VPC Logs, Flow Logs bucket sitting inside the log archive account. And finally, in order to protect that data and not allow access from sources that we don't want, we use an S3 access policy, which we apply to the bucket. So if we come back to meeting those requirements, we have all VPCs covered. We have all of our accounts covered. We've centralized the storage. We prevented changes, and we've automated the process. Now, it's very important to understand that this is just for VPC Flow Logs. So does that mean that I've now diminished the value of what I've just talked about? Not at all, because automation documents exist for many other purposes. So this pattern, from a deployment standpoint, can be used for many other use cases, not just VPC Flow Logs. Some examples could be to delete the default security groups and prevent that from ever being used in my accounts, which could be a significant increase and uptick in security. If anyone is aware of the default security groups, they actually allow any, right? And more importantly, they allow any inbound. So that's from anywhere, allowing inbound connectivity, and that comes from the default security group. So we generally don't want to use that in any certain scenario because it doesn't match the way that we do principle of least privilege. We can enable point-in-time recovery for DynamoDB, another great example of what if I want to do that at scale across all of my DynamoDB instances and I want to maintain that particular state so no one can turn it off. Enabling RDS instance deletion protection, another great one. It stops people from accidentally deleting RDS instances, which could be catastrophic to an organization. Now, if you don't have a service control policy that's protecting that particular RDS instance, and you have given permissions from an IAM standpoint, what happens is a set of permissions are applied together, and the effective permissions could grant someone access to be able to delete it. So when we start thinking about how we compile all that together, we have to start thinking about how we might prevent that from occurring in the first place. And we can turn on that deletion protection by default on all RDS instances. We can also do things like enabling S3 encryption and enforcing the S3 encryption using specific KMS keys, which we control. So super important stuff. And these are just some examples of patterns that you can use among around 100 different automation documents that exist within Systems Manager. But these are all practical use cases that have been used in my customers. And finally, if you'd like to get in touch with Cevo, here's a QR code to get in touch with us. This is what we do. A lot of compliance, a lot of regulated industries. We do have an open role at the moment for a lead data consultant. That's what we have available at the moment. Finally, don't forget to create a AWS Builder ID. This is a slide particularly from Summit. That said, this is super useful. If we think about using this for things like Amazon Q, any of those sort of AI tools, this is super important to have a Builder ID to get you started. And that wraps up my presentation.
Any questions? How does it interact with other, I guess, tooling that would automate the deployment, like if you already had it in like Terraform or something like that?
Yeah, certainly. So the idea behind this, and that's a great question because we're talking about tracking state of instances and things like that. So the idea within the confines of using those particular solutions would be to actually implement those controls within those solutions themselves. That doesn't mean to say that an automated config remediation rule couldn't match that state. So if you think about flipping that on its head and saying, if I'm doing that correct thing within my infrastructure as code, well, how do I prevent someone from doing that and making that manual change, which would inherently make that drift? So you can flip it around to say, I should be doing that in my infrastructure as code, but then how do I implement my preventative controls to prevent someone from changing that particular state and causing that drift in the first place? And config auto-remediation rules could help with that, so that if someone was to nefariously do that, or by accident, then you can at least remediate that and bring it back to the state that it should be in. So it's complementary.
Is there a chance that it would break? Like if your like Terraform, for example, had like your flow logs off, would it, when it tried to reapply and like change it back to what it was, could it cause an issue?
Well, it would only cause that issue after you do the Terraform apply, in that case. So you've overridden the setting.
Yep.
Yeah. And then config remediation rule would actually go back and redo that and re-implement that.
Okay. And what about if there was an SCP to prevent it?
Then you're in a world of hurt.
Okay.
So this is about, if we think about SCPs, generally we think about them in terms of applying coarse grain controls. So your fine grain control should really fall back into other means, such as IAM, for example. Typically what we find in a lot of organisations is from an IAC perspective, they're typically granted much higher level of access to do what they need to do because they've got such a broad range of things that they have to do, more so than individuals or people.
Yeah, so you think most likely it would be under a different set of controls?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, great question. That's certainly a topic that's hard if you haven't implemented that in IAC. And that would go for CloudFormation, it would go for Terraform, it would go for CDK.
We are approaching a world where agentic stuff could respond to that and actually push that into your code repos and
Yeah.
essentially push it out again. But again, great power comes great responsibility.
Yep. Well said. Yeah. And that is actually a real great use case for the use of AI to help with this scenario. So if you wanted to change that state, you go, well, I've got this big code repository with all my Terraform code in it. How do I uplift that now to match what I'm trying to do in auto-remediation? So you could potentially lean on those tools to help you with that and say, add that feature in. So that's a great use case for the use of it. Right.
Config charges on like resource evaluation and changes and that kind of thing.
Yep.
If you have I think Jack, you actually talked about this I think as well.
Yes.
Certain environments that change a lot, that can start to add up. Do
Correct.
you have any hints, tips, and tricks to sort of combat that?
So The default behavior, especially when we start talking about control tower, the default behavior for deployment of config under control tower is continuous recording. So you can actually change the how often that recording is actually applied. So you can actually switch that to, say, daily reporting, which will dramatically reduce the costs associated to that. But yeah, essentially, if you're working in that high change environment, especially serverless workloads are notorious for doing this and causing the config, prices to skyrocket. Being pragmatic about what it is that you're actually implementing. You can also change those config rules as well through conformance packs to change how often they're actually applying for those checks. Any other questions? No?
Thanks, Eric.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Talk to the slide again. We had some pretty cool presentations today. If you want to present, sorry, Michael, I didn't even, sorry. Michael's here too. If you want to talk to Michael, he's on the sponsorship team with Rowan about stuff. So if you work for a company that wants to sponsor, not sure if I'm meant to be plugging that stuff, but here we go. Doesn't matter. But yeah, if you want to do a presentation, like the idea of it, there's quite a few speaker slots and even like the 10-minute ones, right? So that's like, I don't know, did anyone time Greg? How long did he go for?
40 minutes. You've got 2 speaker streams, plenty of speaking slots. You should all submit a talk.
For a real cool part, we actually...
Was that? No, you can't.
You can't, yeah. We actually got in the BCEC, so in the exhibition centre, we actually got one of the auditoriums in there. So this is full big keynote stage, reg seating, everything. So even if you just want to do a 10 presentation to get a really cool photo of you presenting on stage. I'm only taking a photo, I'm not even allowed to present, so, there we go. Cool. All right, let's go to... So thanks once again to our sponsors, Light11 ThoughtWorks and AWS. They're the people that provide us beer, pizza, and keep the event going. So that's really helpful. Next user group, we do this monthly. So next one is on the 19th of June. June is Summit month. So Summit, if you're lucky, it's the 3rd and 4th, 4th and 5th, 3rd and 4th, 3rd and 4th. In Sydney, if you're around. But if you can't make it, we'll have a bit of a recap of any news and things that came up, have a chat with a bunch of people that were able to go and that kind of thing, and any other fun and wonderful things we come up with for that one. I feel like I'm asking tons of people to present today. If you want to present here, we're always looking for speakers and fun things. Or if you've got an idea or a workshop you want to run or anything like that, we're here for that. So feel free to let us know. I'm glad to see everyone's phones up right now, taking a photo of the QR code. Yeah, the bencher, yeah. It's we'll get that made as a proper sticker one. It used to be a sticker, didn't it? Yeah, haven't had it. We'll need to get another set made, I think. We record all of this now, so if you've missed a night or want to go back to something or want to see the slides for something, I try and get it out after a week. Took me a month last time, but I'll do my best to get it there. We have a Slack as well if you want to ask questions, chat, find out news. If you get stuck downstairs after 5 o'clock because the doors lock, that's how you let us know. 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock is this door. And thank you. Feedback if you'd like. Thank you. Safe travels, have a good night.